Our next judgment heuristic is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is a lot like the affect heuristic in that it doesn't actually infer beliefs or estimate likelihoods. Rather, it shapes how we go about inferring beliefs or estimating likelihoods. In particular, confirmation bias is a tendency to seek out and recall favorable evidence to support beliefs or hypotheses or estimates of likelihood, and not to seek out or recall potentially unfavorable or detrimental evidence that would undermine beliefs or lower estimates of likelihood. So when we are given a hypothesis, we tend to look for evidence that would show that it's true and not evidence that would show that it's false. Why would we have that kind of bias, that bias about how we go about looking for evidence for beliefs and estimates of likelihood? Well, I think it goes back again to that 4.4 to 7 million years of human and proto-human evolution. Reactive, relatively simple, concrete problem solving that's linked to specific contents and contexts relies less upon underlying structural features about the world or about the problem. It's not nearly that speculative in nature. If I think there's a tiger there, I'll just look to see if that's moving. So reactive, relatively simple, concrete problems are more easily and effectively solved by seeking evidence that confirm them rather than looking for evidence that disconfirms them. The more speculative a belief or an estimate is, the more likely it is to be wrong, and the better the disconfirming strategy appears. In the chapter, I give a number of different examples of this. But whenever you think about conspiracy theorists, it's a nice example of confirmation bias. You have a hypothesis, say that the Bush administration was behind 9/11, or that the coronavirus was created in a Chinese lab. And instead of looking for evidence that might disconfirm that highly speculative hypothesis, instead what you try and do is come up with more and more evidence to confirm your original view. So just as with the previous judgment heuristics that we've looked at, confirmation bias isn't an inherently evil process. Confirmation bias, when applied to problems where confirmatory evidence is preferable to seeking disconfirmations, is a perfectly good inference strategy. The difficulty that we see with all of these heuristics is a lack of flexibility and a lack of evaluation of the appropriateness of the heuristic to the problem at hand. This combined with the fact that our typical environment in which we're making inferences or estimating likelihoods has changed from a relatively small, relatively stable, relatively homogeneous environment to a large, dynamic and heterogeneous environment where the changes and complexities are constantly emerging. And so one of the difficulties with judgment heuristics overall is that they don't really take into account the predictive value or the problem features in the way that the system 2 inference strategies are designed to do. And in general, we find that people tend to underutilize facts regarding the reliability and predictive value of evidence when making inferences or acting on the basis of that inference. So for example, positive but predictively useless information will influence wagering. And people will ignore qualifying factors on evidence when the conclusion or prediction makes sense or is consistent with the evidence overall. In the next module, we'll turn our attention to two judgment heuristics that seek to modify or update our estimates of likelihood or our beliefs in light of new evidence. So they are the native human reasoning versions of Bayes' theorem.